Hello, this is the voice of Stuart Pearce, and welcome to my series of Deep Dialogues. These are vital conversations I engage in with global soul stewards from all over the planet, providing us with vital understandings about how we can create a new hierarchy of values to help us evolve into a brave new world. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Hey! Firstly, to all, including dear Richard,
Very happy to be here.
thank you. Welcome, everybody, or all you wonderful beacons of light. We have a very big beacon of light sitting with us. There are so many people in the chat box. I won't have time to go through all of your names, but consider from our hearts, from Richard's heart and my heart to you, welcome, 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 and namaste, namaste. Let me introduce this extraordinary gentleman because he's a new friend of mine, and I've been very aware of him for a very considerable amount of time, with lots and lots of people saying to me, you must have Richard Rudd on your Deep Dialogues platform. So let me introduce you to him. Richard is an international teacher, mystic, poet, and born explorer. Having studied with some of the great teachers of the East, he subsequently traveled the world, which included sailing the Atlantic Ocean in a small yacht. More of that later. Richard's mystical journey really began in early life as he experienced supernatural energies rushing through his body, which eventually drew him to Qigong and meditation practices. But his quest was really catalyzed when he synthesized the expansive knowledge he acquired over decades by writing The Gene Keys, a practical guide to explore the miraculous possibilities inherent in our human DNA. Now, it took 7 years to write the book, and today Richard continues to extend the embodiments of its wisdom while sharing the work with an ever-growing audience around the world, having had his book translated into several languages. And I believe that he has been voted one of the top 100 spiritual teachers in the world. We are in the presence of a highly illustrious man. Welcome, welcome, Mr. Rudd. It's wonderful to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I can think of 99 just like that, way higher than me.
Well, it's wonderful when a whole community of peers votes one into an award-winning position. It's always wonderful because of that level of respect and veneration, and indicates the extraordinary endeavor that you've brought to everybody's attention. And I similarly am in the benefit of it. So I feel that you've created a piece of genius.
Well, thank you.
What is the most redeeming factor of the Gene Keys for you personally?
Well, that's a good question. I think, what I like about it is I might as well start right up the front and just be honest. And it's a bit of a trick, because, while you're looking over here, something else is happening over here. And so it's designed in a way to kind of mesmerize the mind. And while that's happening, hopefully the heart is softening and opening, and other parts of us are being healed from trauma that we carry in different ways. So it's a full spectrum set of teachings that both talk to the mind and also talk to the heart and the body. So I think that's one of my favorite things about it.
So you name it as a trick, which for me that devalues it. I feel you're talking about profound magic.
Well, magic is a trick, isn't it? In some way, it's a divine trick.
Right sleight of hand.
Yes, and some of the great teachers are tricksters, and in a way, all spiritual teachings are kind of tricking us, because what's being communicated is the thing that can't be communicated through words. So if we are using words, then the words have to kind of cast a spell so that the true transmission comes through between the words, in the gaps between the words. I think you probably understand that very well, Stuart.
I try to, Richard. So because we live a binary system, and much of, I believe, what you're saying from an archetypal point of view is couched within the substance of duality. Nothing is singular, everything is plural. And of course, the great poets and the great masters, the great mistresses, the great gurus, the great mystics have taught the binary system for years and years and years. If we have the trickster over here, what's over here?
Well, maybe more than just the two of them. But I see what you're asking. In a way, you have the trickster, and then I guess you have like the magus. The magus is that character that delivers the truth without any tricks at all, just a direct transmission.
Yeah.
The sort of Zen
Yes.
kind of aspect. So those two kind of go along with each other in a way.
It's exciting thinking in these terms because we are endeavoring to create the purest, the most wise, the most loving, the most gracious entry point for the wisdom that you are offering us.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that if anyone reads my work or listens to my words, one of the recurrent themes that you'll hear a lot are two words that you'll hear an awful lot from me. One of them is gentleness and the other is patience. And they're both aspects of one crystal in a way. And because the gentleness requires that we soften and our approach, that we're not tense or tight when we approach a sacred teaching. And hence the sort of trick in a way. The trick is in like the old Celtic bards, they lull you with the harp and the words and the poetry and the mythos. And then as you're just drifting off to sleep, then the magus steps in and delivers the transmission. And just as you're in that very open place. So, and it takes time, it takes time. We have to be very patient with ourselves. With any spiritual teaching, because it takes time to mature and inside us. It has to mellow. We have to mellow so that it can blossom in us. And so those are the two aspects that I kind of talk about a lot. And and my tone and my frequency, I think, I do my very best to embody those principles.
Beautiful. And right in the very essence of the richness of the magic of the gene keys is what?
Right in the essence.
Yeah.
A kind of timeless truth, a timeless truth from the beginning of all things, the perennial teaching, the perennial philosophy. I call it a transmission. In a way, it's in a way, it's not a teaching, it's a transmission. So when people begin to understand that, in the beginning, you kind of look at it and you think, well, these are teachings, these are words, this might be knowledge, but it's actually not knowledge. It's more about wisdom, and wisdom's different from knowledge. And like knowledge is something that the way I understand it, knowledge is something that you put inside, you imbibe it, you take it in. Wisdom is something that comes from the inside and comes out. So it's something that has to be awakened or revealed. And so the Gene Keys teachings, they're designed to do that. They're designed to reveal what's already inside us rather than putting extra stuff in. I mean, there's already enough stuff going in as it is, right? So yeah, I guess that's the way of looking at it.
And is there a chief instrument that is utilized within the Gene Keys that awakens wisdom?
Yes, I would call that the art of contemplation, and I've written a little book about the art of contemplation. and it's the art is one of my favorite subjects. Is that it's the greatest in a way of the rather lost arts of the ancient times, particularly in our modern era, where because everything's moving so fast, contemplation is a very slow word, and it requires, like I said about patience, it requires that we savor things, that we, for the body and the being, and especially the subtle bodies, these subtle, higher dimensional aspects of ourself, they require percolation time, for things to go in and reach deep and saturate us. And so, contemplation gives us the space. It's something that we can create in our everyday life. Actually, it's very practical in one respect, because we create pauses in our lives, and in those pauses, magic happens. But the magical part is unpredictable, but we can all create the pauses. And I call it harvesting pauses in a way, because the pauses lie littered in our daily life. They're everywhere, but because we're distracted and in a rush, we don't harvest them. We run straight past almost every pause that the day offers us. And a pause can be short, it can be long, it can be a linger, it can be something we do sort of in a luxurious, sort of slow, sedate, majestic way. And it's cultivating that in our lives that I think creates room for the contemplative kind of fruits to emerge inside us. Yeah, does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And what has been the chief advantage for yourself in embodying the keys and then, of course, transmitting them?
Well, that's a good question as well. I started, I guess I created them firstly for myself, because I was stressed. I felt under stress in this world, and I was a young father with children, and my wife was stressed as well, and so we had this kind of energy of like, this is uncomfortable. And so I applied these teachings first of all for myself. How can I create a place inside myself where I can always go and find that calm? And then so the Gene Keys kind of emerged out of that self-need. And then as I found that place and that new rhythm and that new frequency, and I learned how to transform the lower states into, more beneficial states, more heightened states, then my life became more harmonious, and so did my family life, and the rest of my life. It's not perfect, but that's part of its beauty as well. But yes, I learned for myself, from the Gene Keys. First of all, I was and still am its first student. The teachings, I'm the first student, I would say, and probably, in some respect, kind of, yeah. I still feel very green, even today.
Meaning
I still feel like, because I had a big spiritual experience, and in the 90s, the late 90s, where I was sort of given and shown everything. And then that door kind of closed, but it stayed a little bit ajar, for me, for the rest of my life. It stayed a little bit ajar, which I'm very, very grateful for. But when it was wide open, I saw everything. But so in a way, when it's, there's this part of me that knows that I'm only seeing a small amount of the intelligence of the universe. So that's why I feel like I'm still a bit of a beginner, because there's so much more, because I was shown it, and I remember it in my being. And yet to live in that state, I don't know what that would take. And I also don't know how to get there, you know, and I've learned, I've surrendered to that. I've tried to get back to that, and nothing I tried worked, because in the first place, it wasn't brought about by anything I did. It just happened as a portal that opened through grace. And so I now realize that grace is in charge. And so I've relaxed very deeply, but in a way I still feel that sort of beginner's mind, you know, I guess the Zen tradition would call it. Yeah.
I'm sure that many of us would agree with you that we're all on the pathway of beginning, of becoming something very remarkable, and therefore we fit like keys into this time of infinite cosmology as we begin to really embrace who we truly are, and that we're beings of infinite potential. But of course, as we look into ourselves and we look into our dear ones, our peers around us, or indeed look into our community and then the broader perspective of the world, we realize that there's still a tremendous amount that we all need to do to embody love. Because right at the core of it, of course, is the infinite pleasure of love. And if we can just see that we are part of, I'm going off on one here, so I'll see.
Just go for it. I love it.
I want to hear more about you. But if we can really see that the universe is a love letter written to us by the divine, and that we are being given this opportunity to explore both the material and the immaterial might, magic, and majesty of the divine mind, then we're onto something really, really special. And so humility stays with us, but grace allows us to become more transcendent. I had a moment this afternoon when I was thinking about you, and I tuned into the angelic communion that were, you know, the 12 angels that work with me. And I heard Michael say, I do not need a head full of ideas, but a heart full of silence. And I guess it's the gene keys open us to such an extent deep within our DNA, which I'd love to refer to more specifically in a moment, that we become more aware of the way that our bodies are the repositories, the vessels, the temples for the rich wisdom that you bring to the fore of our consciousness. And therefore, as you were using the word transmission, that there is this transmission that awakens, that these are the keys that awaken something deep within ourselves. Perhaps you could speak to that, because I know that you have developed some very beautiful programs around the way that we can begin to appreciate the keys, because there are a number of keys. Perhaps you could speak to how many keys are there?
Yes, there's 64 keys, and they're called gene keys partly because they, well, from what you said, because they're the template of our DNA. You know, DNA also operates out of 64 codons, which is the codes that we're built upon. All life is built upon those 64. And it's also, the gene keys are partly inspired because of that through the Chinese I Ching, which also has 64 symbols, hexagrams. And so all of that inside us creates this rich template. And another way I look at the gene keys is I sometimes call them the algorithms of awakening. And so each of us has a different set of algorithms that awaken different aspects of our nature. And this is what the gene keys are. They show us our unique path to awakening. And so when you get, you have a profile, right? So you can go onto genekeys.com. You can go right now if you're listening to this. And
oh, no, don't. No, I want you. No, I want them. I want
but you can listen and look. And you can get a profile, your profile, you put in your birth data. And what that does is it's really giving you a snapshot of when you arrived on this plane in the space-time continuum. So the matrix kind of, throws a snapshot of you. And then through that snapshot, we can see, well, here are the algorithms that relate to you, to your awakening. And the gene keys, the 64 of them, have 3 levels, as you know, Stuart. So, we call them the shadow, and then the gift, and then the siddhi. The siddhi is a Sanskrit word meaning divine emanation. And so the beauty of it is that the shadow is like the seed, and then the gift is the flower that comes out of the seed. So we all have these shadows, these traumas, but in those traumas, if we have the courage to look in them deeply, lie gifts hidden, and those gifts, as we go into the shadow and we explore it and we surround it with our compassion and our understanding, then those gifts begin to emerge from those shadows. And then the siddhi is the final flowering. It's where the flower becomes the fruit. It drops the fruit. And of course, the fruit also contains a seed. So this whole notion of this transcendent, transformational pathway, these pathways that relate to each of us. So yes, the programs that I've created with Gene Keys take us through these pathways. They take you through your pathway, each one of us. So when you look at your profile, you'll see the steps that the shadows that you are here to transform specifically, and so there are many words in the Gene Keys for these shadows and their relationships inside us. I guess if I give an example, the shadow of, let's take 19, shadow of codependence, and that shadow, once we begin to understand how that operates, we'll see that instead of being attached to another person and we learn to become independent, then that shadow transforms into the gift of sensitivity. And then that gift of sensitivity blossoms into the siddhi of divine sacrifice. And there's a whole story embedded in each gene key like that. So we have to kind of get deep inside these keys, contemplate them. And yes, they're a transmission. So they begin to awaken us as though we've sort of taken a homeopathic pill. Each one is like a pill we take in, and then it goes inside us, and then it begins to activate aspects, so it quickens our evolution. It catalyzes a transformational process inside us if we allow it to.
Well, it's such an extraordinary body of work. I mean, anybody who wades through, and I say wade through because it's not just a mental exercise, as you're underlining repeatedly as we go through this conversation. It's very much a neurological process of going deep into the fiber of what it is to be a human. That many processes are really called forth. And so I can't see anybody approaching it without any due diligence, otherwise what's the point? Go and play with the PlayStation, which means that automatically we connect more with shadow consciousness rather than moving into the light. I was just rereading this afternoon in preparation for the retreat that I'm doing at the end of this year in Egypt, which is a country that I've been traveling through as a pilgrim for 50 years and running retreats there for 20 years. So I'm really relieved to get back, because COVID put a small stop to my plans of development, which is really about the crystallization of feeling how these points of identification that we're mentioning can become deep within the soma of our bodies through ritual and by walking into the great temples. Have you been, Richard? Would you like to come in December? You don't have to answer that. And have you been into these temples in Egypt?
No, I haven't visited Egypt. I have been into many temples, but not those ones.
Be really fascinating to see. I would love to observe what happens to your aura when you walk into Abydos, because I feel that you would have a really strong connection with the great creator of Abydos. Abydos is in this unique situation. It's considered to be the spiritual heart of Egypt, and it's where the Assyrian is, that is actually below ground level, so to speak. It's a sunken temple that has the flower of life. In fact, several flowers of life have appeared upon the granite walls. It's quite extraordinary. However, it was created by Seti I, who was the father of Ramses II. And Seti I was a great, wise pharaoh, but he was also a magi. He was also a magician. I had the great pleasure about 5 years ago of walking into his tomb that had been closed for many, many years while it was restored. And it's one of the largest tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And I was the only person there. It was extraordinary. So Seti came and spoke to me. Anyway,
Beautiful.
back to the feeling of the fact that the genes take us into an immersion where we are immersed very deeply in the extraordinary nature of what our bodies are all about. Hence, they are in association with the DNA. And I mention Egypt also because the 64 netta, the 64 gods and goddesses, are similarly interwoven with the 64 principles of our genetic code, of our DNA. And of course, I'm really particularly interested that the gene keys have a way of being able to open the 44 dormant strands of DNA at this moment. You must be immensely exhilarated by the way that people all around the world have been drawn to the exquisite nature of this work. Have there been some really extraordinary revelations from a supernatural point of view through many of the people who have come and used the gene keys, or indeed, having used them, have then come to you in workshop or masterclass?
I'm quite, as you probably know, I'm a bit of a hermit myself. So I'm quite a family man. So I do a lot of teaching online, and I of course have taught many workshops, but obviously in the last years not so many. So I do occasionally hear stories of people who've had experiences, but most of the time it seems to be kind of quite ordinary things. Like, I mean, I say like people saying this has helped save my marriage, or it's helped me immensely with coping with the death of my grandfather or whatever it was. So they're really quite human things, which I'm really happy about, and I'm always quite amazed. I think, wow, really, did that really help you? I had no idea that it was having this effect. So it's one of those things, sometimes you put something out in the world, but you don't really know where it's going or how it's being received. But for the most part, I think it's quite gratefully received. And I hope so, because I've tried to keep it very approachable, affordable, and sort of accessible for people, because I think it can be a very useful thing. It's also, part of that notoriety that Gene Keys are sort of having now is also built upon, it's based on another system partly called human design, which is also having its ascendancy, and that's an amazing system in its own right. And I studied with Ra, the founder of that system, and spent some good time with him. And at a point I just needed to take it in a different direction for myself. But I always honor him and one of the places that it was inspired by, and that community. And it owes something to that as well, and that community around the world. And many of them kind of come across, and we cross-pollinate, which I think is an inherently healthy thing. Ra himself was a heretic, and I'm something of a heretic as well. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because I noticed there was a commentary going on in the chat box that I was about to draw our attention to, because what I would love everybody to understand, although this is an open platform of discussion, it is called Deep Dialogues, and I invite extraordinary human beings onto this platform. We have sitting with us a very wise teacher, and therefore I would ask all of you to embody grace and love, rather than seeing the platform as an opportunity to vent any aspect of your shadow complex. Please see that this is full of the peace and the joy and the grace and the service of great teaching. Thank you so much. And so there was a small interchange going on about the interrelatability of the gene keys with human design. I had a fascinating client coming to me about 2 years ago who was one of the leading exponents of human design, and I think had worked with Ra, who I have not. And I tend to be a very, very sensual individual that becomes enraptured by the way that feelings move through me rather than getting caught up in lofty intellect. Although I've developed words over the years that help me to understand more of how my left brain can understand or comprehend difficult processes. And she gave me a wonderful reading as a great gift, which was really lovely, through the human design process. But I didn't really hear anything that I haven't thus far discovered for myself. However, when I tuned into the gene keys, I found that the mystical poesy of the gene keys hit a very powerful, or struck a very powerful chord in my heart. And so I want to thank you for that, because I know that the teaching of grace and the teaching of humility and the teaching of gentleness was so beautifully laced within the fretwork of what the gene keys are all about. So I thank you for that. And I recognize that in you as an embodied witness, that you embody grace and gentleness and humility and lots of other things. What is your progression with the gene keys? I mean, much of it, I'm sure, is probably in secret, but in the sense of, are there particular projects that you would like to establish in the world as extrapolations of the gene keys?
Well, in a way, the gene keys, I invite people to contribute their own genius into the gene keys. So I am keen to present them as more of an open system, rather than a set of teachings delivered by one person. And so that's how I'd like them to be perceived, so that, as I said, the wisdom lies inside us. So if the keys can help awaken that wisdom, then there's no reason that you or anyone can't be a teacher of wisdom, or a sharer of wisdom, or an embodiment of wisdom. You don't have to be a teacher, but you can be an embodiment of wisdom in just about any sphere of life that there is. So that's kind of my next phase, really, of opening them up and allowing others to rise up through them in different ways. And while I can finish the job of completing my personal transmissions, of which there's still a few left that I haven't shared or taught. But yeah, I'm really keen to see the global collectivity begin to awaken through these teachings. And that seems to be the essence, because they contain a prophecy, and that's really what the prophecy is about. The prophecy is held by Gene Key 55. And that key is the sort of source code for freedom. And so it's something that's coming into our world, and it's breaking open now. And one of the things it will break open, according to the prophecy, is this collective intelligence that lies within human beings, in our consciousness. These city states, these higher states. I discovered, by the way, early on, that there was a tradition in India of the 64 cities. I didn't know that when I named it city, and there was suddenly like, oh, there's a long tradition of that. So that was a kind of confirmation of some of these teachings. But yeah, we have these codings built into our DNA, and they're dormant for the most part. Unless we have some kind of moment of grace or a spiritual breakthrough, then suddenly those higher codes kind of illuminate, they flare up, and they give us a sneak preview, if you like, of our higher state of consciousness that we will one day live in permanently as a whole species. So that's part of the prophecy that the gene keys contain. It's part of their reason for being here. It's where they diverged a little bit from the human design teaching and transmission, and took off in their own way, in their own direction. And it's in that impulse that the sort of secret to them lies. Like, to help us prepare for that collective awakening. Yeah, so pretty powerful, you know.
So just once again, could you just identify code 50 or key 55?
Yeah, it's, you know, one of the best ways to talk about it is through the emblem, the symbol of the dragonfly, which I talk about in the book, and it's on the front of all my books, you know, little dragonflies, because the dragonfly symbolizes that 55 in a way, because the lower frequency of it is about being a victim. And the dragonfly is a very successful predator. Before it's a dragonfly, it's a nymph. It lives underwater. You probably know this. It lives underwater for several years, and as this predator, and it doesn't know that lying hidden inside it is this other creature, completely resplendent, beautiful creature of the air. It has no idea. And then one day, this sleeping gene is triggered, and after 2 or 3 years, it climbs up out of the water on a reed or something, and it's never left the water before, and the sun begins to kind of work on it, that solar energy, and it begins to change it and open it up from inside, and then this other creature cracks open the lava, and this thorax uncurls, and the wings come out, and there's this beautiful, resplendent, iridescent dragon creature that obviously then takes to the air, one of the most amazing insects, ancient insects that we have. And it's a great symbol, a metaphor, that story or allegory of the future consciousness of humanity, because, you know, it's our watery nature, it's our emotional desire nature that will in time help us, that will carry the transmission to its heightened consciousness. Literally, we get vaporized, you know, the vapor of the steam of our sexual essence gets transformed and converted into this higher, you know, Shen energy, the Chinese call it, that then allows us to kind of to sort of live inside that higher vehicle. But what's amazing about that is that if you consider the difference in those two creatures, they are in such different dimensions that it's very difficult for us, even in the transmutation phase, you know, to imagine what that other creature is really like. It's a complete and utter rebirth. It's not just a change or a normal sort of transformation. It's an utter rebirth of our consciousness in another dimension. So it's very difficult for us to fully understand that, and we do our best. But yeah, what's coming is, you know, according to the Gene Keys anyway, quite extraordinary.
Amazing. Well, so many things that I'd love to comment on. Why is it called a dragonfly?
That's a very good question, isn't it? Yeah, I'm going to leave that one hanging.
Okay. Because, you know, from the mystical pathways that are, of course, very divergent in our cultures, but right at the core of the mystical pathway is the notion of the death and the resurrection. And it seems that, you know, which is why I call my retreats, mostly in Egypt, the resurrection retreats. When I move into the warmer climes, although this is, you know, Egypt is desert, but I go in December when it's cooler, because it's very, very hot in the summertime. When I go to wonderful islands like Hawaii or the Dominican Republic, then I completely transpose it into the seven keys to heaven. So it all becomes a transmutational process. But literally, you know, we do die to our old selves and we're reborn to our divine blueprint. So obviously what precedes the death and the resurrection is a wonderful examination into the shadow complex of our beings as we travel through the varying rituals that are all sonic rituals to awaken. So I feel that there are keys, sorry to use the word yet again, but there are keys within the mystical pathway, within the ancient wisdom traditions of the process that you're actually talking about within the transmutation of the whatever the primary stage is into the wonderful flying dragon. And of course, what's interesting about 55 also, that there's relativity in relation to ancient numerology, because 5 and 5 is 10, and 10 is 1, and 1 is the Magus. And so we keep coming back to that high vibrational functioning unit of super realization, where we begin to realize ourselves in relation to the Godhead, in relation to this vast divine intelligence. If, and I'm sure you often do, but if post this conversation you were able to be taken physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually into the presence of the emanating principles of the divine, what would be the first question that you would ask of God?
I don't know if I'd ask a question. I had this experience. I'm going to divert slightly. I had an experience where I was led through by a past life regression therapist into the, I went far back, and I went to the birth of my soul, right, which was quite something, and the conception of my soul. And then I went back even through that conception into that sort of still point of the source of all. And it was at that point that she asked this question. She said, "What is your purpose?" And all I heard in response to that was laughter. My own laughter, the laughter of the universe echoing around the inside of my being. And I started to laugh, and then she started to laugh. And it was just this incredible echo that just resounded of, the truth of all being, being beyond all questions. So I would hope that if I approached the one, that I wouldn't have any questions left. I suspect that if I did have any questions left, rather like those people that used to go and visit Ramana Maharshi's ashram in the south of India, they would often report back, especially when he was in his silence, that they would go there with hundreds of questions. And he wouldn't answer them because he was in silence. But within a few days, every single one of them had just evaporated, just through being in that silence. So I think that is a sort of answer. But
I cohere and concur with you. I've met it myself, where being in the presence of Sai Baba in private audience, he asked me if I had any questions. So I was compelled, and my statement was, in the face of the divine, I know nothing, so I have no questions. I'm here merely to receive. And he said, "You passed the test. Well done. This is very good." So the inquiring mind goes on and on, isn't it? What else do we do with the moments? That's a very facile, ridiculous statement. Don't take any notice of it. So the laughter that you were speaking of leads to the way that you offered us the understanding of the trickster. So there is a jokester or a trickster within you.
Definitely. And I'm the last one to be, I'm the last one kind of laughing in a way, or I sometimes feel I'm the one that's duped, but it's a delightful, it's a relationship, because the cosmic trickster, we are in a relationship with that. And even like in our daily lives, I'm writing this book at the moment. It's the lines of the I Ching, 384 lines, and I'm writing these sutras for each line, and then commentaries. And so it's my I Ching, in a way, my own version. And it was funny because Ra, who the founder of human design, once said to me, "You will write your own I Ching one day." And finally, it was true what he said. And one of the sutras that I wrote a few months ago was about the tricksters, and it talked about the tricksters in the world, who we meet or we come across. And they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, whether it's someone that robs you, or whether it's someone that, betrays you, or whether it's and it's the trickster energy that comes and it tests us, and it throws a curveball right into the heart of our being. And it tests our provocation, our anger, our forgiveness. All kinds of programs in us are tested by the trickster energy. And it's like you and Sai Baba. If you pass, it's because you've let go. You've surrendered to the trick, and you've even honored it, because you've found the beauty in it, and in a way that's that's what I think that sutra catches. And I think it's a real secret of all spiritual teachings and paths that we have to learn to get the joke, and there's so many of them, and they're always on us.
Yeah, I feel in my understanding that what you're referring to as the trickster is, from the extraordinary information that I've been given, is actually the divine fool, who has great trickery and laughter, but actually is the truth seeker all the time. So there is a balance between the shadow aspects of deceit and disdain, and the grace and humility of serving the sovereign, who hopefully has transformed themselves into the magical state of being the high priest.
Yes, quite.
It's interesting that there are very few books that have been written about, whether from an academic point of view or from a spiritual point of view, about the substance of the divine fool in Shakespeare. And I look forward to reading them when they eventually emerge. Maybe there have been, and I'm just simply very ignorant. But I know for the 20 years that I was at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, we had the most remarkable man called Peter Dorkin, who came in and provided us with the wisdom of Shakespeare. And he was head of the Baconian Society, or the Baconian Trust, so that we were really able to see all the cryptograms that lie within Shakespeare's teachings, as it were. And that there was this great balance between the left and the right hemisphere, if you like, between the trickery and the veneration of the clown in relation to his master, the great divine one in the skies. So I may be inaccurate in saying all of that. As you move forward with the prophecy of the key 55, are there other aspects of the project that you wish to expand on? And then I would love to turn to the whole substance of our audience and ask if there are any questions. I notice that one or two people have.
Well, the other side of the 55, which I rather love, is the 22, because if you look at those two numbers, you'll see they're sort of reversed or mirrored. And the 22 was another sort of slightly freak gene key, I guess you could say, where they're both the longest two in the book, and out of the 22 came all the teachings of the feminine. So the 55 taught these teachings of the future, and the 22 teach all the teachings of the past. And the past is all about going back into our ancestral DNA and our roots and finding the source of our suffering. So the 22 is all about suffering and the nature of suffering and the algorithms of suffering and the codes that pass through the feminine. That doesn't mean that it has nothing to do with like women suffering or anything like that. It's not gender related in that way. It's the feminine essence that in a way the mother has to suffer to give birth to the child, or sacrifice in some way, not that she has to suffer, but there's a process of deep power in the feminine thread, and all those threads that come through the 22, which is the key of grace. There's a whole set of teachings that just poured out of that key and continue to pour out of that key. One of them is called the 7 Sacred Seals, which became a whole kind of transmission in its own right, with it now has its own community and its own set of rather theatrical, beautiful invocations that people do, and to invoke the spirit of grace to help heal our traumas, and so it's and calling on higher angelic forces as well. That teaching, but it goes really deep through a teaching called the Venus sequence, which were the algorithms that I was shown that reveal the layers of our trauma. It's like it's the one part of the gene keys that is the most gritty and gutsy, and I challenge anyone to kind of not go through that program and sort of be stirred up in some way, because it goes right into the kind of core of our wounding. And in doing so, it shows us the gifts. It shows us these beautiful diamonds that lie at the heart of each of our wounds. And it helps us come to terms or resolve some of the things that happened to us when we were young, in our childhood, whatever they were, or even things that were imprinted in the womb, or even things that we have inherited through our karmic legacy, through our parents or our ancestors, that also lie hidden inside us. Our, the karmic sanskaras, they sometimes called, that we carry, that we bring into the world, these slates of like specific trauma that we're here to heal on behalf of the whole. So in that 22 is contained the teachings of the Magdalene. It's funny because I was in south of France this summer, and I went to some of those Magdalene sites for the first time, and I really kind of felt this resonance to these teachings of the number 22. And it's one of those master numbers, but it's an incredible code, and it is, as I said, it's the code for grace itself, great mysterious teaching of the feminine, the divine feminine, which is having a huge resurgence currently, and it's obviously about time.
The dawning of the age of Aquarius.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful question that Iman has placed. She has a question, I believe it's a she, forgive me if it's a he. How can we link the gene keys to our soul contract?
Well, in a way, the gene keys uncovers what your soul contract is. That's what these algorithms do. They are the script of our contract. So if our contract is written in a script, this is the script. And so as you unpeel them layer by layer, you get to see, you're looking into the journey of your soul. You're looking at why you attract certain relationships at certain times. You're looking at what covers up the beautiful selfless love that lies in your heart. What sometimes gets in the way of that. You're looking at sometimes what patterns get in the way of us truly prospering in this life, truly prospering. And so you're looking at layer upon layer of opportunities, which are all interconnected. So in your profile, they're all interconnected. So if you do work on even just one of them, you're doing work on all of them simultaneously. So if you have a breakthrough in the sphere of your relationships, then you'll also have a breakthrough in the sphere of your prosperity. And you'll get a bit closer to your higher purpose. And you'll also have a breakthrough in your health, because it's all interconnected, everything inside us. That's why, in a way, the gene keys profile is called a hologenetic profile, because holo meaning holographic, and genetic means it's everything inside our DNA is interconnected in this holographic language. So that our soul contract is written in all those algorithms inside us, downloaded or imprinted at the point of conception, and then reorganized in a way and given birth to at the point of birth. Yeah.
Have you ever had a conversation with Freddie Silver?
No. Who's Freddie Silver?
Well, he's an anthropologist, a great thinker,
right,
and explorer of ethnoculture. And he just has some very fascinating theories of interconnectability between the varying principal indigenous cultures of our planet, particularly in relation to the star system and how significant they are. It would just be really interesting to see, because you've obviously joined the dots a tremendous amount through your journey, particularly the 7 years of writing the Gene Keys, and now through teaching it. So it's rather remarkable. I mean, Iman says, thank you, got it. So that was really quite an extraordinary answer. Bless you. When gene code should I look at? I think really what that means, Richard, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I would start, if you want to, there's two places you can start, I would say. There's many places. It's a labyrinth, right? And some of us, are bold, and we like to jump in the deep end, and so those people who like to jump in the deep end, you could get my Gene Keys book and you could start playing with it. But it's a big book, and I should caution you that it's like there's a lot in it, and it's a journey in itself. If you want to start with something lighter and a little bit easier to digest, then the Art of Contemplation is a very nice beginning. Those are books. If you want to start with what I really recommend is the programs. The most popular program we have is called the Activation Sequence. It's part one of my Golden Path series. And what it does is it takes you step by step into your profile. But, so you might want to think about that. If you want something even lighter, then there's a very nice little course. Actually, I'm trying to remember where it is, but there's a free little course called 7 Days of Grace, which if you put in 7 Days of Grace to Google, I'm sure it'll come up. And it's a 7-day little program that goes a little bit into those feminine teachings I was talking about earlier, the 7 seals. So there's a few places you could begin. That's like a nice little taster. If you want to get the meat, then you want to start part one of the Golden Path. And that, as I said, that takes you into your profile. But start with your profile. If you click on your life's work, there's a little audio by me on your life's work.
Literally, where people, perhaps Ryan could put up the website, thegenekeys.com.
Yeah, so if you go to genekeys.com, get free profile, and then look in your profile. And as you start clicking, you'll see your life's work, which is the top sphere, that key in there. There's an audio by me that describes that key in detail. And that's a really great place to begin. See if that kind of reawakens anything inside you. And then I've recorded audios for every single key. So you can always just, but if you do part one of the path, you get the keys built into that program. And you also get a book that's built into that program, the Activation Sequence book. And you get a lot of meditations. You get the whole journey. You get a lot, actually, which is why it's a very popular course. And also, actually, at the moment, free calls every month to the community who are exploring their gene keys through the Activation Sequence. So there's a lot right now that's really alive in that one. I really thoroughly recommend it. It's a beautiful journey. It's probably a journey that will take you a few months of diving in, exploring, contemplating, digesting, listening to stuff, watching stuff, beginning to get a feel for what this all means. In the beginning, it can seem a lot, but that program takes it apart piece by piece in a very measured, easy to understand way, in simple sound bites, so I really recommend that. Golden Path, part one.
Beautiful. And we have time just for one more question from Poetically Inclined, number 2, which is, could you please speak, I love Poetically Inclined. Could you please speak to Gene Key 60 and reveal in a couple of sentences its potency?
Yes, the crocodile. Every key also has an animal association, or has a bird, an animal, and an underworld creature. And the crocodile is one I'm playing with myself at the moment. I'm in a program called the Dreamark, which is an extension of the Gene Keys. But anyway, it goes off into all the animals and into the ancestral energies of each of the keys. And but the 60 is it's the key of justice. It's like, in the tarot, justice. It's such a mysterious and powerful universal quality. So that 60, or embedded in it, is a journey, a pathway towards justice, which always has to go through injustice. Probably it has to go through intense limitation in some form, and it has to go through the gift of realism. So it's like the shadow is limitation, the gift is realism. You have to kind of get through the limitations and begin to kind of understand them. It's about working with the structures of creation, of matter, of form. It's actually one of the most powerful magical gene keys, but it's one of the densest. You know, the most magic is contained in the densest areas. You know, that's where the gods have hidden their greatest secrets, in the densest areas of matter. And so we have to really take a lot of courage and go down into that field of that injustice. You know, and someone was saying soul contracts. Like, so if you have Gene Key 60, one of your soul contracts is probably to do battle with injustice in some form. You know, there can be many layers to that. You know, it can be planetary, it can be local, it can be, you know, it can be karmic, it can be even inside your own being, inside your own body. You know, that and you know, coming to that place where reality dawns, and you're in that. The gift of realism is the gift of being able to kind of know something and accept it for what it is. And then out of that comes the grace of true justice, divine justice, which is something that lands in us, is offered to us and given to us. So it's a deep healing. It's almost a miraculous healing. And Gene Key 60 at its highest levels has all manner of miracles hidden in it. You know, so it's, yeah, incredibly potent. But every key has a journey in it, and you know, each of us has to unlock those journeys for ourselves.
Richard, this has been absolutely fascinating. You know, I'm reminded of the quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth like the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth he who gives and he who takes, and it is mightiest in the mightiest. Do you have any particular projects that you'd like to just swiftly offer to our attendant audience?
Well, I think, you know, the ones I've described are really, if you're new to the Gene Keys, then a lovely place to begin is with that golden path. If you want a taster, then do the 7 Days of Grace, little free program. And hopefully within 1 week, you will have had a little breakthrough of grace of some form. The other thing I might mention for those who feel adventurous and are drawn to it is this new program called the Dreamark that I spent with a team, and Rosie Aronson, a friend of mine. We spent 3 years creating this incredible offering. It's based on the Gene Keys, but it doesn't require that you know the Gene Keys, and it's all about the, you know, moving through the intuition, the imagination, the dream realm. It uses the symbolic power of animals and birds and creatures, through our dream realm to access the same codes that we've been talking about here, but in the form of indigenous wisdom, you know, from different cultures and areas. So if that, you know, sounds interesting, then you could go and look. It's all on my website. The Dreamark is on there as well under courses and programs. So have a look through and see what your intuition guides you to. I think if you're interested, that's the best advice I could give.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sure you're all deep in your hearts and way into your souls will be thanking Mr. Rudd for coming forth and spending this wonderful 60 minutes, or just over 60 minutes, of his free time, full of gratis, full of grace, and full of glistening wisdom. So I thank you. And please do come back next week. There will be another extraordinary male guest whom I'm going to allow to be just floating there in the ethers. And if you're interested, ladies and gentlemen, to look at stuartpearce.com, and you will see I am offering a series of programs that are absolutely fascinating. Particularly, there will be a 90-minute workshop on, thank you, Ryan, on Sunday evening, that's September the 11th, called Enchantment, where we literally chant, pray, think, feel, engage in magic in our lives to open up transcendental corridors of light to assist us in our ascension process. And then, of course, there is the retreat that you'll all want to come on in Egypt at the end of this year called the Resurrection Retreat. It's all on the events page. Just go there. So, Richard, once again, thank you so much. Everybody who's tuned in, thank you very much indeed.
Thank
and I
you.
look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Ryan.
Stuart.
Stay where you are, please, Richard.